The book that brought him home. What would you do if the child you never knew existed was the only proof that someone once tried to destroy your entire future? Dante Calloway built his empire on silence and fear, and for years, that was enough. But one rainy night in a dying Chicago bookstore, a worn science book and a child's hidden birthmark cracked open a truth that 8 years of lies had buried. Someone stole his family from him, someone he trusted with his life. And now that same someone is willing to burn everything down to keep the secret buried forever. If you found this story, stay until the end. Hit like and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The rain came in sideways off Lake Michigan that Thursday night, the kind of cold October rain that didn't fall so much as a tack, driving itself into collars and eye sockets and the gaps between buttons, punishing anyone still out on the street with something that felt personal. Most of Chicago had the sense to stay inside. The bars on West Addison were packed with bodies pressed 3 deep against the counter, steam rising off wet jackets, everyone pretending the weather was an excuse and not just the usual Thursday loneliness wearing a different coat. Dante Calloway didn't drink in bars anymore. He stood outside the black SUV idling at the corner of Halsted and Waverly, hands loose at his sides, watching the street the way a man watches something he's already decided to walk away from. He was 41 years old and looked it in the jaw. The hard set of it, the slight gray threading his temples. But his eyes were younger than the rest of him in a way that made people uncomfortable. Eyes that still wanted things. That was the problem, always had been, the wanting. "We can circle the block again," Marcus said from the driver's seat. Marcus Pruitt, 34, 6'3", who had been driving Dante for 6 years and who never once asked a question Dante didn't invite. "No." Dante pulled his coat tighter. "I'll walk." Marcus said nothing. That was the arrangement. The street Dante walked down was called Maplewood, though no maples had stood here since before either of them was born, the city having long ago replaced every living thing with concrete and sodium light. The block was caught between what it used to be and what the developers hadn't finished making it into. 3 empty storefronts with brown paper in the windows, a dry cleaner's with a handwritten closed sign taped at an angle, a laundromat leaking yellow light and the smell of fabric softener into the wet night. And at the end of the block, nearly swallowed by the buildings pressing in on both sides, a bookstore. "Whitmore's Books," said the sign above the door, the lettering painted directly onto the glass in a style that suggested the 1970s and no graphic design budget. The lights inside were still on, warm and amber against the rain-black night, and through the smeared glass, Dante could see shelves packed floor to ceiling with the kind of disorganized abundance that only happened when the owner actually read the books. There was a small display in the window. Children's titles arranged around a handwritten card that said, "Tonight, extended hours, come in from the cold." Dante was not a man who walked into bookstores. He stood there for a moment, rain tapping at his shoulders, and couldn't have told you what made him reach for the door handle. Later, he would decide it was the light, just the light and the cold, and the fact that he was tired in a way that sleep didn't fix. He pushed inside. A small bell above the door announced him. The smell hit first: old paper, dust, wood polish, and something underneath all of that, something almost like cedar, the scent of rooms where people have spent long hours being quiet. Dante stood just inside the threshold and looked around. The store was narrow and deep, the shelves crammed so tightly together that navigating the aisles required turning sideways in places. Every surface held books, books in stacks on the floor, books shoved horizontally across the tops of other books, books in milk crates by the door waiting to be shelved, apparently, but also just living there. There was no one immediately visible. Then he heard movement near the back, the quick, precise sound of someone moving between shelves who knew the layout cold, and a woman appeared from behind a tower of atlases carrying a cardboard box, her hair half escaped from a bun at the back of her head, a pencil tucked behind one ear, reading glasses pushed up onto her forehead like a second set of eyes. She saw him and stopped. Not the stop of recognition. The stop of a person recalibrating when their environment produces something unexpected. She looked at him the way people looked at expensive cars parked in front of corner stores. Not afraid, exactly, but aware. We're technically closing, she said. Not sorry about it. But technically isn't actually, so. She set the box down on the counter with a thud. What are you looking for? I don't know. She looked at him a moment longer. That's either very honest or a bad sign. Probably both. But something in her expression shifted. Not quite a smile, but the decision not to ask follow-up questions. She moved behind the counter and began unpacking the box, setting books in small stacks according to some system Dante couldn't decode. She was maybe 27, 28, slim, quick-handed, wearing a flannel shirt over a thermal undershirt and jeans with paint on the left knee. No jewelry except small silver studs in her ears. No makeup. She had the face of someone who didn't spend a lot of time thinking about her face. Dante moved further into the store. He wasn't browsing, exactly. He didn't know how to browse, had never in his adult life spent time in a place that didn't have a purpose he'd defined in advance. But he moved through the shelves the way he moved through most unfamiliar spaces, cataloging exits, assessing the space, letting the room tell him what it wanted him to know. He found it on a low shelf near the back, wedged between two larger books that had squeezed it almost flat. A science book, Mum, the kind made for young readers, with a worn laminated cover showing the solar system against a black background and the title stamped in silver. Wonders of the Known Universe, Volume 2. The spine was cracked. The cover had been repaired with tape that had since yellowed, and across every visible surface, the cover, the spine, the edges of the pages, someone had written in small, careful pencil handwriting. Notes. Observations. Questions. The handwriting was a child's, but the questions weren't. If light takes 8 minutes to reach Earth from the sun, then what we see is always 8 minutes old. Does that mean we're always living in the past? Dante stood there with the book in his hands and read that line twice. That one's not for sale. He turned. The woman, Elena, he'd see her name on a card by the register later, had come to the end of the aisle and was watching him with her arms folded, not aggressive, just clear. It's on your shelf, he said. It's waiting to go home. My son left it here by accident this morning, and I'm keeping it behind the counter for him. She paused. He'd be inconsolable without it. That's his research. Dante looked at the handwriting again. How old is he? 8. She moved forward and held out her hand for the book. He's been annotating that thing for 2 years. Please. Dante gave it back. She tucked it under her arm with the easy firmness of someone used to protecting things. He watched her do it and felt, oddly, like he was watching something he recognized. Not a memory exactly, more like the ghost of one. The way certain songs from your childhood sound familiar, even in rooms where they've never been played. I'll take something else, he said. What would you recommend? She looked at him with an expression that said she was choosing whether to be bothered. Then, what do you read? I don't much. What did you read? Before. He hadn't expected the question to land the way it did. He thought about it. History, he said finally. Military history. For a while. She disappeared into the shelves and came back with a battered paperback. A history of the Korean War, a civilian account, told through individual soldiers and the families left behind. She set it on the counter. $14. He paid with cash. He always paid with cash. He folded his receipt and put it in his coat pocket without looking at it, the way he did with everything he wasn't ready to examine. At the door, he stopped. He reached into his coat and pulled out his wallet again. He removed $200 bills and set them on the nearest flat surface, the edge of a display shelf, and looked back at Elena. She stared at him. What is that? For the book. It's not for sale. Not to buy it. For the boy. He nodded at the book under her arm. For the research. She stared at him for a long moment. He couldn't read her face well enough to know what she was thinking, which was unusual. He was generally good at faces. I don't take charity, she said. It's not charity. I just read something worth paying for. He left before she could hand it back. Outside, the rain had eased to a drizzle. Dante walked the 3 blocks back to where Marcus had circled and was waiting, engine idling, heater running. Dante got into the back seat and sat with the paperback in his lap and said nothing for a full minute. Good? Marcus asked. Drive. Marcus drove. Dante opened the book to the first page and stared at the text without reading it. He was thinking about the handwriting in the margins of a science book. Does that mean we're always living in the past? He was thinking about the way the woman had tucked the book under her arm, that specific economy of motion, the absolute certainty that this thing was hers to protect. He was thinking about something he couldn't name, some vibration in the air of that store that had nothing to do with books. He told himself to stop thinking about it. He was not successful. He had a meeting at 11. He always had a meeting at 11 on Thursdays, a sit-down with the three men who ran the operational side of what Dante's organization controlled across the North Side, a territory that had taken 12 years to build and required constant maintenance the way old buildings required constant maintenance, always something crumbling somewhere, always something that needed reinforcement before it failed. The meeting took place in the back room of a restaurant on North Clark that Dante technically owned through a shell company, in a private room with no windows and a single door that Marcus stood in front of for the duration. The three men were named Reeves, Cho, and Paulson. Reeves was 52 and had been with the family since before Dante took over. Cho was 38 and had come up through the docks operation, smart, methodical, difficult to read. Paulson was the youngest at 31 and the most aggressive, always pushing for expansion, always seeing opportunity where Dante saw risk. The item on the agenda tonight was a supply chain problem on the west side, a distribution arrangement that was being pressured by a competing operation moving in from Cicero, backed by money that hadn't been there 6 months ago. New money, which meant outside money, which meant someone had decided to invest in Chicago's underside without first having a conversation with the people who already lived there. We push back, Paulson said. He was leaning forward with his forearms on the table, the way he always leaned when he was excited about something. Hard. You let this go 2 more weeks, they think we're soft. We're not soft, Dante said. I know that, you know that. Do they know that? Dante looked at Reeves. What's the source on the outside money? Still work in it. Reeves had the flat affect of a man who had long ago made peace with delivering incomplete information. Whoever it is, they're using intermediaries. 4 layers at minimum, not local. Dante leaned back. He had a headache that had started sometime around 10 and hadn't let up. Find out where the money comes from before we do anything. I'm not starting a fight I don't understand. We might not have the time to find out where the money comes from. Paulson sat back with the barely contained frustration of a man who had learned, through painful experience, that arguing with Dante Calloway past a certain point was like arguing with load-bearing walls. You could try. The wall didn't care. The meeting ended at 12:30. Dante rode home in silence. He lived in a condominium in Lincoln Park, the 4th floor, a corner unit with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the park toward the lake. He'd bought it 8 years ago when he first took control of the family operation, and in 8 years he had done essentially nothing to personalize it. The furniture was expensive and selected by someone else. The walls were bare. The kitchen was clean because he almost never cooked. There were books on one shelf, the military history he'd mentioned to Elena, and a dozen others in similar veins, but they were shelved spine out and didn't look recently touched. It was the apartment of a man who slept somewhere, not of a man who lived somewhere. He poured 3 fingers of bourbon he didn't particularly want and stood at the window watching the park below, the streetlights making pale circles on the wet pavement, a few late-night runners making their determined laps despite the weather. He watched them and thought, not for the first time, about what it would look like to be that, just a person, out in the weather, going somewhere because they wanted to go there. His phone buzzed. A text from a number he didn't recognize. You left money on my shelf. He stared at it. Then, you left a book in my store. And then a moment later, your receipt was still in it. Elena Whitmore, in case you forgot. He hadn't looked at the receipt. He'd put it in his pocket without reading it. She'd apparently kept it, or found it, or... He typed, How'd you get this number? Receipt had a callback number for returns. I didn't look it up. I'm not whatever you're thinking. He almost smiled. He didn't do that often enough that he'd lost the habit, but he came close. The money was for the research, he typed. Keep it. My son doesn't take money from strangers. Tell him it's from someone who read one sentence of his work and thought it was worth paying for. A long pause. Long enough that he thought she'd decided not to respond. Then, what sentence? The one about living in the past. Another pause. He's going to ask me who you are. Tell him it doesn't matter. She didn't respond after that. Dante put the phone down and finished the bourbon and went to bed, and lay there, in the dark of his expensive, empty apartment, thinking about a child who asked questions about light and time, and about a woman who folded her arms like she was daring the world to try something. He slept eventually. Not well. He went back the next evening. He told himself it was because he'd forgotten to ask about a specific title, a follow-up to the Korean War book. He was aware this was not true, but the lie was functional enough to get him through the door. Elena looked up from the counter when the bell above the door rang and registered him with an expression that did not perform surprise. You again. I had a question about— No, you didn't. She went back to what she was doing, which was cataloging a stack of new arrivals, scanning barcodes with a handheld reader. What do you actually want? He stood inside the door. The store was busier than the night before. Not crowded, but 3 or 4 customers moving through the shelves, a woman in the children's section reading aloud to a toddler, an older man in the history section who seemed to be having an argument with a book. Dante moved to the counter and stood with his hands in his pockets. I wanted to know if your son liked the book, he said. Elena set down the scanner. She looked at him with the careful attention of someone deciding how much to reveal. He asked about you. What did he ask? He asked if you were smart. I said I didn't know. A pause. He said anyone who understood that sentence was probably smart. He has opinions. How old did you say he was? 8. Something in her posture shifted slightly. Not defensive, more like she was measuring him. Why? Just wondering. He moved to the window display and looked at it without really seeing it. 8 years old. Born in— He did the math automatically, without intending to. Born roughly 9 years ago, maybe 9.5. Which placed the conception at— He stopped the math. Where it was going was nowhere he had a right to go based on nothing but a stranger's child and a sentence in a book. Is he here? Dante asked. He's in the back room. He does homework here after school. Her voice was perfectly level. He's not available for inspection. I know what you are, Elena said quietly. The sentence landed in the air between them and didn't go away. Dante turned to look at her. She was watching him with the same careful, measuring expression, and he understood that this was not a woman who frightened easily and not a woman who said things she hadn't thought through. What am I? He said. A man people are afraid of. She held his gaze. I've lived in this neighborhood 15 years. I know who runs what on the north side. I know the name Calloway. Then you know to be careful. I'm not afraid of you, she said. I want to be clear about that. But I'm careful about who gets near my son. Those are different things. He looked at her for a long moment. He wasn't used to people who made that distinction, who separated fear from caution, who were one without being the other. It was an unusual kind of clear-eyed. Fair, he said. From the back of the store, through a door he hadn't noticed before, came the sound of something being assembled, pieces clicking together, the rustling of paper, a child's unconscious hum, tuneless and focused. The sound of a mind occupied with something that interested it completely. Dante looked at the door. Don't, Elena said. Not a threat, just a statement. He looked away. I'm going. He bought another book on his way out. A random selection. He barely saw what it was. At the door he paused. I'm not what you think I am, he said. Or maybe I am, but not entirely. She didn't answer. He left. Outside, in the thin evening light, he stood on the sidewalk and breathed the cold air and tried to understand what was happening to him. Nothing was happening to him. He had walked into a bookstore twice. He had spoken to a woman who wasn't afraid of him, which was unusual but not impossible. He had heard a child humming in a back room. He pulled out his phone and called a number he hadn't dialed in almost 3 years. I need something looked up, he said when the man answered. Quiet. Just background. A woman named Elena Whitmore. She runs a bookstore on Maplewood. I want to know everything about her, and I want it by morning." He hung up and walked back to the car. Okay. The file arrived at 6 in the morning, delivered to his encrypted email by a man named Greer, who had done this kind of work for Dante since the early days, and who had the discretion of someone who understood, viscerally, what happened to people who didn't have it. Dante read it at his kitchen table with coffee, going cold beside him. Elena Catherine Whitmore, 27 years old, born in Rockford, Illinois. Parents both deceased, father from a heart attack when she was 19, mother 2 years later from something the file didn't specify. She'd moved to Chicago at 20 for college, a literature degree from DePaul that she'd apparently never finished, leaving in her second year. She'd worked at Whitmore's Books since then. The store had belonged to her mother's sister, who'd died 4 years ago and left it to Elena. She had a small apartment above the store. She owed money on the building but was current on the payments. She drove a 10-year-old Civic. She had one outstanding parking ticket from 2021. No criminal record, no connections to anyone in Dante's world. And then, one dependent, minor child, male, Milo James Whitmore, 8 years old. Father, not listed on birth certificate. Dante read that line again. Father, not listed. He put the paper down flat on the table. He picked up his coffee. He set it back down without drinking it. He was aware of a sound in his own chest. Not his heartbeat, he could identify that, but something adjacent to it, something that didn't have a name he could reach for easily, something that felt like a door opening in a wall he'd believed was solid. He was 32 years old 9 years ago. He had been different then. Before the full weight of the organization had settled on him, before certain things happened that stripped certain things away. 9 years ago, he had been the kind of man who could walk into a bookstore on a rainy night and mean nothing by it, who could feel things without cataloging them, who had loved, he had used that word once, had believed he meant it, a woman whose face he had not let himself think about in 8 years, a woman whose name he had made himself stop saying. He picked up the file again. Elena Catherine Whitmore. He looked at the photograph Greer had pulled. A social media photo, apparently the only one available, showing Elena at what looked like a street fair, laughing at something outside the frame. Her hair was down. She looked younger, or maybe just different when she wasn't working. He knew that face. The realization didn't arrive with thunder. It arrived the way cold water arrives when you've been standing too long in a warm shower and the hot water finally runs out. Sudden, undeniable, and completely changing the temperature of everything. He had known her face from the moment he walked into the store. He had known it and buried the knowing under 8 years of deliberate forgetting and the certainty, the absolute certainty he'd been given, that the woman in question was gone, had left, had chosen to leave. He'd been told that. He'd been told, with evidence he hadn't thought to question, that Elena, a different Elena, surely, a coincidence, a ghost, not this same, had gone. Milo James Whitmore, 8 years old, father not listed. Dante sat at his kitchen table in the gray morning light and did not move for a long time. When he finally reached for his phone, he didn't call Marcus. He didn't call Greer. He called a number that rang 4 times before a man answered with the particular alertness of someone who had been awake already. "Uncle?" Dante said. Victor Calloway's voice came back smooth and warm, the way it always was. The voice of a man who had spent 60 years perfecting the sound of trustworthiness. "Dante, early for you. I need to ask you something." "Of course. Anything." Dante looked at the photograph of Elena Whitmore laughing at something outside the frame. 9 years ago, he said slowly, when you told me about the woman, that she'd gone, that she'd left the city. He paused. You said you'd seen her yourself, that she told you she didn't want to be found. A half-second pause, barely there. That's right. Were you lying to me? The pause this time was longer, long enough to mean something, long enough that all the smooth warmth in Victor Calloway's voice couldn't quite bridge the gap before it returned. Dante, what's brought this on? Answer the question. Of course I wasn't. Victor, Dante's voice was very quiet. Don't. Silence on the line. And in that silence, in the specific quality of it, the silence of a man choosing what to say next rather than simply saying the true thing, Dante heard everything he needed to hear. He ended the call. He sat for another long moment. Then he stood up, put on his coat, and drove to Maplewood Street. Well, it was 7:15 in the morning when he parked across the street from Whitmore's Books. The store was closed. The closed sign in the door, the amber lights off inside. But the lights in the apartment above were on, a warm yellow rectangle in the pale gray morning, and through the thin curtain Dante could see the silhouette of movement. Someone making breakfast, maybe, getting a child ready for school. He sat in the car and watched the window. After about 10 minutes, the front door of the building, not the store entrance but a side door, residential, opened, and Elena Whitmore came out in a heavy coat, a knit hat pulled down over her ears, a backpack over one shoulder. She was holding a thermos in one hand. Behind her came the boy. Dante saw the boy, and something happened to his breathing. He was small for 8, or maybe average, Dante had no reference, with dark hair cut in a slightly uneven line across his forehead that suggested Elena had done it herself. He wore a puffy jacket in navy blue and carried a backpack covered in what appeared to be solar system stickers. He was talking as he came through the door, animated, his hands moving in the quick, emphatic gestures of a child explaining something he found deeply important. Elena was listening and nodding, and Dante could see from across the street that she was only half present, doing the morning math of getting somewhere on time. But she was listening, really listening, the kind that shows in the angle of a person's head. And the boy knew it, could feel the quality of her attention, and was building on it. They started walking down the sidewalk, headed toward the school 3 blocks over. Dante knew without knowing how he knew. And as they turned at the corner, the boy reached up to tug at his collar, adjusting something. The zipper catch, maybe, or the tag. And for one moment, in the pale morning light, the collar of his jacket pulled down and Dante saw it. On the right side of the boy's neck, just below the jawline, a mark. Small, irregular. The deep reddish-brown color of old port wine. A birthmark. Dante's hands tightened on the steering wheel until his knuckles went white. He knew that mark. He had grown up knowing it, had seen it in mirrors every morning of his childhood, had been told by his mother, before she died, when he was 14, that it was a Callaway mark, that his grandfather had carried it and his grandfather's father before that it skipped generations sometimes, but always came back. Always came back. He had it on his own neck, same side, same shape, same color. He sat in the car and watched Elena Whitmore and her son disappear around the corner. His son. The word arrived not as thought, but as fact. The way gravity is a fact. The way the cold is a fact. Not something you decide to believe, but something that is simply true, was always true, existed before you understood it. His son had been alive for 8 years. His son had been 6 blocks from this car every day for how long? How long had they been here? The store had been in the family for years. Elena had inherited it, which meant she had been here. In this city, this neighborhood, close enough to... He thought of Victor's voice on the phone. The half-second pause. The longer silence. Of course I wasn't. He thought of being 23 years old and being told by the only family he had left that the woman he loved had gone, had chosen to go, had not left a word or a way to reach her, that it was done, that the world was the world, and not every story ended the way you wanted it to. He thought of how quickly, how efficiently he had folded that grief into the structure of everything else, how he had turned it into something hard and useful, how he had built an empire, partly, out of the specific weight of that particular loss. 8 years. 8 years of a life happening 6 blocks from where he was sitting. Dante Callaway sat in his car in the cold morning light, and for the first time in longer than he could calculate, something that was not anger and not calculation and not the flat, controlled affect of a man who ran things, something raw and without a name, moved through him like a current. He did not move for a long time. When he finally reached for his phone, his hand was not entirely steady. He had to know the truth before he did anything, had to know all of it, not just what he suspected, not just what a birthmark and a silence on a phone line suggested, but the full shape of what had been done, and by whom, and for what reason. Because if he was right, If the thing he was thinking was true, then the next move he made would matter more than any move he had made in 12 years of running the Callaway organization. And he needed to make it without destroying what he was only just beginning to understand he had. He needed to make it without destroying her, without destroying the boy who left handwritten questions in the margins of science books, without destroying himself, which was, possibly, the hardest part. He started the car. He drove past the corner where they'd turned. He didn't stop, but he looked. That night, Dante's investigator sent a second file. Inside it was a single document, a handwritten letter 9 years old that had never been delivered. A letter in a woman's handwriting addressed to Dante Callaway that began, "I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I need you to know you're going to be a father." The letter had been intercepted. The evidence of who intercepted it was attached, and the name at the bottom of that evidence was the same name that had been in Dante's life since the beginning, the same name that answered the phone that morning with the voice of a man performing trustworthiness, the same name that had for 9 years stood between Dante Callaway and everything that mattered. The letter was 4 pages long. Dante read it 3 times at his kitchen table, and by the 3rd time through he had stopped registering the words individually and was simply sitting with the fact of it, the physical fact of paper that had been held by her hands, written in her handwriting, folded and sealed and addressed and then taken. Intercepted was the word Greer had used in the attached note, clinical and precise, but what it meant was taken. Stolen. Buried in whatever filing system Victor Callaway used to manage the pieces of other people's lives he had decided to repurpose. The letter was dated 9 years and 3 months ago. It was written in the particular careful handwriting of someone who had started over more than once, crossing out words and rewriting them above the line, the evidence of someone trying to say something true and finding that truth kept requiring more precision than she'd expected. "I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I need you to know you're going to be a father. I know what your family is. I know what world you live in. I'm not asking you to leave it. I'm not asking you for anything, actually, except that you know. Because I think you have a right to know, and because I think, I might be wrong about this, I've been wrong before, I think you'd want to. If you don't respond, I'll understand. I'll figure it out. I'm good at figuring things out. But if you do, if any part of you wants to, I'm still here. I'm not going anywhere." She had signed it with her full name, Elena Catherine Whitmore, like she wanted him to be able to find her, like she was making it as easy as possible for him to find his way back if he wanted to. He had never seen it. Greer's accompanying documentation was thorough in the specific way that Greer's work always was. No editorializing, just chain of evidence. The letter had been given to Victor Callaway by a courier who had been paid to intercept Elena's mail during the period when Dante and Elena had been, the word Greer had used was associated, which covered everything and nothing. Victor had paid the courier. Victor had kept the letter. The documentation showed a payment record, a name, a date, everything Greer could reconstruct from 9-year-old financial records that Victor had apparently never thought to fully destroy, because Victor was a man who trusted his own architecture so completely that he hadn't imagined anyone would ever look this carefully at the foundation. Dante folded the letter and put it in the inside pocket of his jacket, against his chest. He sat for a moment with his hands flat on the table. Then he picked up his phone and called Marcus. "I need you to find out where Victor is tonight," he said. Quietly. "Don't use the usual channels. Use your own." Marcus, to his credit, asked no questions. "Give me an hour." "You have 40 minutes. He spent those 40 minutes doing something he hadn't done in years. He sat still. Not the deliberate stillness of a man controlling a room, not the calculated quiet he deployed in meetings when he wanted people to feel the weight of his attention. Just stillness. The stillness of a man who had just had the architecture of the last 8 years of his life revealed as someone else's construction, and who needed a moment before he started deciding what to do about it. Victor Callaway was 61 years old. He had run the family operation for 15 years before Dante was old enough and capable enough to take it over. And even after the transition of power, he had remained present, advising, positioned at the edges of everything, in the way that a man who knows where all the bodies are buried remains powerful long after his official role has ended. He had been Dante's father's brother. He had been, after Dante's parents died, the closest thing to family that Dante had. Dante had trusted him completely, which was, he understood now, exactly what Victor had intended. Marcus called back in 35 minutes. He's at the Clark Street place, private dinner, 6 people. None of ours. Who? Still working it. One of them might be connected to the Cicero money. Dante stood up from the table. I'm coming in. Dante? Marcus's voice carried something unusual in it, a careful quality, like a man choosing his footing on uncertain ground. Whatever you're thinking, maybe sleep on it. I'm not going to sleep on it. I know, I'm just noting that as an option that exists. Noted. He picked up his coat. 20 minutes. The Clark Street place was a private club, not the kind with a sign or a membership card, the kind that existed through reputation and the specific social architecture of men who had money and wanted to spend it in rooms where no one would photograph them. Dante had been there a dozen times. He knew the back entrance, knew which of the staff were on his payroll and which weren't, knew that the private dining room on the second floor had a connecting hallway that let him approach from the east side of the building without walking through the main room. He went in through the kitchen. The chef, a compact Honduran man named Felix, who had been cooking in this kitchen for 11 years and who had learned through several instructive experiences not to react when Dante Calloway came in through his back door, looked up from a sauce he was reducing and said nothing. Dante nodded at him. Felix nodded back and returned to his sauce. The hallway outside the kitchen smelled like old carpet and cooking fat. Dante moved through it quickly, not running, just moving at the specific pace of a man who owned whatever room he was in. He reached the east corridor of the second floor and stopped outside the door of the private dining room, which was closed. He could hear Victor's voice through the door, not the words, the cadence. That particular warm, measured cadence that Dante had heard at dinner tables and in strategy meetings, and in the specific intimate tone Victor used when he was building something with a person, creating the sense of confidence, of shared purpose, of being the only 2 people in the room who really understood each other. Dante had watched him do it 100 times with 100 different people, and had always thought of it as a skill, as something admirable, the gift of making people feel seen. He understood now it was something else entirely. He opened the door. Victor was at the head of a table set for 6, 5 other men arranged around him in the specific seating pattern of a conversation that had been going on for a while and had reached a comfortable middle point. The men were mid-50s to mid-60s, the look of money that was old enough to be comfortable and new enough to still want more. One of them, a heavy-set man with silver hair and the careful posture of someone who worked out because his doctor told him to, Dante recognized as a name connected to the western suburbs, Cicero money, exactly as Marcus had suspected. All 6 men turned when the door opened. Victor's face did something complex and very fast. A sequence of expressions that moved through surprise and calculation and arrived in about a quarter of a second at warmth. Dante, he smiled. I didn't know you were coming tonight. I know, Dante said. He looked at the 5 other men. Give us the room. A silence. The men looked at Victor. Victor's smile held, but something behind his eyes shifted. A rapid internal recalibration, the adjusting of position by a man who understood that the geometry of the situation had just changed. Gentlemen, Victor said, with the ease of someone who had been managing rooms for 40 years, would you give us just a few minutes? There's brandy in the lounge. The 5 men left with the slightly hurried efficiency of people who had been in enough rooms to know when they should not be in one. The door closed behind the last of them. Victor remained seated. He picked up his wine glass and held it without drinking. Dante, sit down. I'll stand. You're being dramatic. Victor. Dante's voice was very quiet. He pulled the letter from his inside pocket and set it on the table in front of his uncle. I found this. Victor looked at the letter. He did not pick it up. His face did not change in any visible way, but his hand on the wine glass tightened slightly. Just slightly, the adjustment of grip that happened below conscious control. Dante had spent 20 years reading men in rooms, and he didn't miss it. Where did you get that? Victor said. Does it matter? It matters to me. It doesn't matter to me that it matters to you. Dante moved to the chair nearest Victor and sat down, leaning forward, elbows on the table, putting himself in Victor's eye line at close range. 9 years ago, you told me she left. You told me she made a choice and I needed to respect it. You were very— He paused, choosing the word kind about it. You sat with me. You had a drink with me. You said these things happen, that the world she came from and the world we lived in were incompatible, that she was smart enough to know it. Victor said nothing. You had already intercepted her letter, Dante said. You already knew she was pregnant. You sat across from me and had a drink and told me to let her go, and you already knew. Dante, how long have you known about the boy? The silence stretched. Victor set his wine glass down very carefully on the table. He looked at Dante with the eyes of a man who has spent his entire life making calculations and is now making one that needs to be exactly right. Let me explain something to you, Victor said, and his voice had shifted, the warmth gone, replaced by something more direct, less performed. The voice of a man talking to another man, without the gloss. You were 23 years old. You were barely holding the organization together after your father died. I had just spent 15 years building that structure, and I handed it to you because you were family, and because I believed you could do it. What you were becoming, was not compatible with a child, with a family, with that life. That wasn't your decision to make. Someone had to make it. That wasn't your decision, Dante said again, each word separate and deliberate. You would have walked away. Victor leaned forward. You would have walked away from everything I built, everything your father built, everything that was supposed to go to you and through you and beyond you, for a woman you'd known 8 months, for a situation that would have destroyed your focus and gotten you killed within a year. I saved your life. You stole my son. The words fell between them like something dropped from a height, and the sound they made was not loud, but it was final, the sound of a thing that couldn't be unsaid and that changed the shape of everything around it. Victor sat back. He looked at Dante for a long moment. You didn't know you had a son until— I know now. Dante, listen to me carefully. Victor's voice had gone very level, the tone of a man making an argument he believes in. That boy has a life. The woman has a life. You going in there and detonating yourself in the middle of it? What does that accomplish? What does it give them? You're going to show up and tell her you know, and then what? You pull them into this world? You make them targets? I'm not asking for your analysis. You need it anyway, because you're sitting here wanting to feel something and you're going to make a decision based on that feeling that you cannot take back. Like the decision you made 9 years ago? Victor's jaw tightened. That's different. How? Not a question, a wall. Victor looked at him. In the quiet, Dante could hear the muffled sounds of the building around them. Somewhere below, a bar, glasses, low music. The ordinary sounds of the world continuing while this particular room held still. I did what I thought was right for the family, Victor said finally. I know you believe that, Dante said. That's what makes it worse. He stood up. He picked up the letter and put it back in his pocket. I'm going to look into what you've been doing, he said. All of it. The decisions you've made without telling me, the arrangements you've had in place. I'm going to look at all of it. And when I have the full picture, we're going to have a different conversation. Victor's eyes narrowed. Be careful, Dante. I'm always careful. He moved to the door. That's something you taught me. He left. He didn't go to the bookstore. Not that night. Not the next day. He spent 48 hours inside the machinery of his own organization, pulling threads he hadn't thought to pull before, looking at the structural decisions of the last decade through a new lens. What he found was not shocking, not individually, not in isolation, but in aggregate. It built a picture of a man who had spent years positioning himself inside Dante's operation as something more than an advisor. Financial arrangements that had Victor's fingerprints on them, routed through enough layers to be invisible if you weren't looking. Alliances with people outside the organization that predated Dante's leadership and had never been disclosed. The Cicero money, the new money pressing at the West Side operation, traced back through 4 careful degrees of separation to a holding company that Victor had an interest in. Victor was funding the competition, not to destroy Dante, to pressure him. to create exactly the kind of ongoing instability that required someone steady and experienced nearby, that made Dante dependent on the counsel of an older man who understood the landscape. Victor hadn't been trying to take the organization from Dante. He'd been trying to make Dante need him. Dante sat with this for a long time. He shared none of it with Reeves, Cho, or Paulson. He shared it with Marcus only because Marcus was the one man in his life who had no position in the organization's hierarchy, no operational role, no stake in the power structure, and whose loyalty was therefore the only kind Dante was currently sure of. Marcus listened to all of it without expression. When Dante finished, he said, "So, what do you want to do?" "I don't know yet." "That's new?" "I know." "The woman, Elena." Marcus said the name carefully, like he was carrying it. "You're going to tell her." "I have to." "She's not going to react well." "I know." "She doesn't know you. She knows your name, which means she knows your reputation, which is—" Marcus paused. "Not going to help you." "I know that too." "And the kid?" Dante said nothing. "You can't walk in there and tell an 8-year-old boy that his father is—" Marcus stopped. Started again. "You're going to need to think about what you want this to look like. Because there's no version of this that isn't complicated, and the version where you go in without a plan is the worst one." "I'm not going in without a plan." "What's the plan?" Dante looked at him. "I haven't finished making it." Marcus nodded slowly. "Okay." He put the car in drive. "Where to?" "Maplewood Street." "I thought you didn't have a plan." "I don't have a finished plan. That's different from no plan." He went in on a Saturday afternoon when the store would have the kind of casual foot traffic that let a person enter without it meaning something, without the focused weight of an after-hours visit announcing itself. He wore ordinary clothes, dark jeans, a gray jacket, nothing that cost what his clothes usually cost. He looked, he hoped, like a person who was just there. The store was warm and slightly chaotic in the way that Saturday afternoons in small spaces always were. 2 couples browsing, a teenager sitting cross-legged on the floor in the science section, reading something she clearly intended to buy at some point, a man asking Elena questions about a gift for his wife with the helpless energy of someone who had never bought a book as a present before. Dante moved to a shelf near the back and stood with a book in his hands and watched Elena work. She was good at it. That was the thing he kept noticing. Not just competent, but genuinely good. The kind of good that came from caring about the thing itself, rather than just performing the function. She remembered what people had bought before. She asked follow-up questions that actually connected to the answers she'd gotten. She pulled books from shelves with the confidence of someone who had read them, could tell you not just what they were about, but what it felt like to read them. The man with the gift question left with 3 books and an expression of relieved gratitude. Elena turned and saw Dante. A pause, a recalibration similar to the one she'd done the first night, but shorter now, more practiced. "Third time," she said. "I need to talk to you." "I'm working." "I know. I'll wait." She looked at him. Whatever she saw in his face, and he was not today trying to control what she saw, made her expression shift, not toward fear, toward something more careful and less dismissible. "Milo's in the back," she said quietly. "I know." "Whatever you need to say, you're not saying it in front of him." "Agreed." She held his gaze for another moment. Then she turned and called to the teenager on the floor. "Casey, can you watch the counter for 20 minutes? Door alarm's on." Casey looked up, assessed the situation with the quick social intelligence of a teenager who worked part-time and understood what 20 minutes meant in adult context, and nodded. Elena came around the counter and tilted her head toward the back. The back room was half storage and half Milo's domain. Boxes of books stacked against one wall, a long folding table that served as a receiving station, and at the far end, a child-sized workspace that had been assembled with obvious care. A real desk, not a folding table painted blue. Bookshelves built low enough for an 8-year-old to reach, packed with science titles and notebooks. A lamp with good light. A magnetic board covered in handwritten notes and diagrams. Milo was at the desk, both elbows on the surface, face about 6 inches from a notebook he was writing in, entirely absorbed. He had his mother's way of being in a room. the quality of presence that didn't need to assert itself. He looked up when they entered, and Dante saw his own face looking back at him. Not entirely, not a photograph, not a copy, but the underlying architecture was unmistakable. The set of the jaw, the particular way the eyes sat in the face, the dark quality of the hair, and on the right side of his neck, where the collar of his shirt had opened slightly, the birthmark, the exact shape, the exact color. Dante stopped breathing for a moment. Milo looked at him with calm curiosity. "You're the man from the bookstore," he said. "You bought my book." "Milo," Elena's voice was level. "Go next door to Mrs. Callahan's for a bit. Take your notebook." "But I'm in the middle of—" "Milo." The boy looked between them with the specific intelligence of a child who understood that something was happening in the room that wasn't about him, but might be about him, and who had learned to trust his mother's tone on these distinctions. He closed his notebook and picked it up. He crossed to the door and then stopped, looking at Dante. "Did you read the book?" he asked. Dante found his voice. "Some of it." "Did you read my notes?" "Yes." The boy looked at him steadily. "Did you think they were stupid?" "No," Dante said. "I thought they were the smartest thing I'd read in a long time." Something moved through Milo's expression, the contained, serious pleasure of someone who had been told a true thing by a person they suspected of meaning it. He nodded once, solemnly, and went out through the door. Elena closed it behind him. She turned to face Dante with her arms folded and her back straight, and her eyes carrying the specific look of a woman who had been managing difficult situations alone for a long time and was not about to stop now. "Talk," she said. Dante reached into his jacket and brought out the letter. He held it out to her. She didn't take it immediately. She looked at it. The aged paper, the familiar fold, and her face did something he'd never seen it do. All the careful control, the careful fortification of it, shifted, not collapsed. Shifted, like a wall that had been built to withstand weather and was now encountering something it hadn't been built for. She took it with 2 fingers like she needed to be careful about how much of herself touched it. She unfolded it and read the first line, and her jaw tightened and her eyes closed for exactly 2 seconds. When she opened them, she looked at him. "Where did you get this?" "It was intercepted. By someone close to me. Someone who decided—" He stopped. "I didn't know," he said. "I want you to understand that. I was told you left. I was told you'd chosen not to be in contact. I believed it. I shouldn't have, but I did." "You believed I left?" "Yes." Without a word. Without— Her voice had gone very controlled, the specific control of someone keeping themselves from something larger. "You believed that. I was 23 and someone I trusted told me it was true, and I—" He stopped. "I believed it. I'm not defending it. I'm telling you what happened." She turned away from him. She moved to the far side of the room and stood with her back to him, and her arms pressed tight across her chest, and Dante waited because there was nothing else to do, because this was the part where he had no moves, where everything was hers. 8 years, she said, and her voice from the back was different, stripped of the professional evenness she used with customers and the careful flatness she'd deployed with him. Tired. Just tired. For a while I thought maybe you'd gotten it and decided that it was a decision." She turned back. Her eyes were dry, because she was not, apparently, a woman who cried easily, but they were bright in a way that meant something was pressing at them. "That was almost easier, to believe you made a choice. I didn't make that choice. I know that now." She looked at the letter in her hand. "Who intercepted it?" "My uncle. Victor Calloway." "Yes." A long silence. She walked to the blue desk, her son's desk, and sat in his chair, and it was slightly too small for her, but she sat in it anyway, with the letter in her lap, and looked at the floor. "What do you want?" she said. "From this. From telling me." "I want to know him," Dante said. I don't know what that looks like. I don't know how to do this. I've never done this. But I want to know my son." She looked up. "He doesn't know anything. He thinks his father wasn't—" That his father was someone who wasn't in a position to, She stopped. I told him something vague. He's 8. He accepted it because 8-year-olds mostly accept what they're told if it's said with enough confidence. I know. He cannot know what you do, what your name means. I understand. Do you? She leaned forward slightly, and for the first time he felt the real edge in her, the thing under the competence and the management, the anger that had been there the whole time, living quietly, biding. Because understanding is different from agreeing with me in a back room because you feel guilty. I need you to actually understand that if you come into his life and you bring your world with you, any part of it, I will remove him from it completely and you will not find us. I've done it before. I can do it again. I know you can. I'm serious, Dante. I know. He held her gaze. I'm trying to figure out how to be in his life without bringing my world with me. She looked at him for a long time, reading him the way she read people, with that specific attention he'd noticed the first night, the attention that wasn't performing. That's not a small thing, she said finally. What you're describing, I know. You don't just walk away from what you are. I know that too. Then why are you saying it like it's simple? I'm not, Dante said. I'm saying it's what I want. Simple is different from possible. He took a breath. I'm asking for time, to figure out if there's a way to make it possible. I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to let me try to earn that eventually, over time, if you're willing. The silence in the back room of Whitmore's Books was very particular. Outside it, Casey was managing the counter, and the afternoon foot traffic was moving through the store with the ordinary sounds of browsers and the occasional clatter of something being replaced on a shelf. Somewhere in Mrs. Callahan's apartment next door, Milo was probably writing in his notebook, filling pages with questions about things he wanted to understand. Elena looked at the letter one more time. Then she folded it along its original creases and set it on the desk, her son's desk, and left it there. Sunday afternoon, she said. I close at 4. Milo works on a project for an hour before dinner. You can... She paused, choosing. You can be here. You can be in the store. I'm not telling him anything yet. Not until I decide there's something to tell. Dante nodded. And Dante... She waited until she was sure he was listening completely. If anything from your world touches this building, this block, this boy, we're done. There's no conversation. There's no more time. Are we clear? We're clear, he said. He meant it when he said it. He had no way of knowing, walking out through the store and past Casey and into the cold November street, that Victor Calloway had not been sitting still for the past 48 hours. That Victor, who had spent 40 years reading situations and moving ahead of them, had already understood what Dante's phone call meant, what questions would follow, where those questions would lead. That Victor had already made 2 calls of his own, one to a man who managed problems, and one to the person who had been quietly monitoring Dante's movements on Victor's behalf for the past 6 months. That he had already decided that the bookstore on Maplewood Street was a liability he could not afford. And that by the time Dante was pulling away from the curb, a man neither of them knew by sight was already walking slowly past the front window of Whitmore's Books, pausing just long enough to look inside and continuing down the block without stopping. The man who walked past Whitmore's Books on a cold November afternoon had no name that anyone in Dante's organization would recognize. That was the point. Victor Calloway had spent 40 years understanding one fundamental truth about power. The moves that mattered most were the ones that couldn't be traced back to you. Not because you were afraid. Victor was not a man who frightened easily, but because untraceable moves were reusable moves, and a man who could only act once in a given situation was a man whose options were always narrowing. Victor's options had never narrowed. That was the discipline of a lifetime. The man's name was Carver. He did work for 3 different organizations in Chicago and had done work for Victor specifically on 4 occasions over the past 6 years, none of which had produced anything that could be connected to either of them in any documentation that existed anywhere. He was not large or physically threatening in any visible way. He had a face that people forgot. These were his professional assets, and he maintained them carefully. What Carver did on that first pass was observe. He noted the layout of the ground floor visible through the glass, the shelves, the counter position, the single employee visible, the door configuration. He noted the residential entrance on the side of the building. He noted that the lights on the second floor were on and that a shadow moved across the frosted window of what appeared to be a bathroom. He kept walking. He made a call from the end of the block. Victor received the call at 7:15 that evening in his own apartment on North Lake Shore Drive, standing at the window in the specific posture of a man who had made his peace with whatever he was about to authorize. "How soon?" Victor said. "Depends on what you want. I want it quiet. I want it to look like an accident. I want there to be nothing in that building afterward that anyone could use." Carver was quiet for a moment. "The woman and the kid will not be there," Victor said. "I will make sure of that. You go in after closing, after they're out. I need the back room specifically. There are records, financial documents connected to me that the woman doesn't even know she has, left by her predecessor, the aunt. I need that room and everything in it gone." Another pause. "And if they're not out?" Victor looked at the lake. The water was black and choppy in the November wind, the lights of the opposite shore making long yellow lines across the surface. "They'll be out," he said. "Set it for Tuesday. I'll handle the rest." He ended the call. He stood at the window for another moment and then moved to his desk and picked up his phone again, this time to compose a text. Carefully worded, the kind of wording that could mean several things depending on who read it, to Reeves. Because Reeves was the second part of the problem. Reeves, who had been with the Callaway operation for 22 years, longer than Dante had been in charge, longer even than Dante's father's final years. Reeves, who Dante trusted with operational details that he didn't share with Cho or Paulson. Reeves, who had been on Victor's payroll, saw quietly, carefully, in a way that had required years of patient financial architecture to conceal since the year Dante took over. Victor's message to Reeves was 4 words. He's asking about Whitmore. Reeves's response came back in under a minute. Understood. How far? Victor typed back, as far as necessary. Dante didn't know about Reeves yet. That was the thing about the architecture of a long deception. It didn't reveal itself all at once. You pulled one thread and found the thread behind it, and behind that one was another, and the full shape of the thing only became visible once you'd unraveled enough of it to see the pattern. Dante had found the financial connections to the Cicero money. He had found the intercepted letter. He had not yet found Reeves. Sunday afternoon arrived cold and bright, the kind of November day that made Chicago look beautiful from inside and brutal from outside, the light crystalline and merciless. Dante arrived at Whitmore's at 3:45. He parked a block away and walked, hands in his pockets, and stood outside the store for a moment before going in. Through the glass, he could see the store in its late afternoon state, quieter than Saturday, the kind of Sunday light that made everything look slightly more serious. Elena was at the counter with a cup of coffee. A single customer was browsing near the front. Through the doorway to the back room, just visible at this angle, he could see the edge of the blue desk, a small hand moving across a notebook page. He went inside. Elena looked up. Whatever she had resolved over the past day, she had arrived at a version of it that she was going to hold to. He could see that in the set of her jaw, the deliberate evenness of her expression. Not warm, not cold, controlled. "He's working on something for school," she said quietly. "He gets frustrated when he's interrupted. Just be in the space. Don't push." Dante nodded. He moved to a chair near the door to the back room and sat in it and picked up a book from the stack beside it and opened it without registering what it was. He was not reading. He was listening to the sound of a child's pencil moving across paper and trying to understand what he was doing in this room and what it was going to cost, and whether the cost was something he could actually pay. After about 20 minutes, the sound of the pencil stopped. A beat. Then Milo appeared in the doorway. He looked at Dante with the same calm curiosity as before. The look of a child who had been raised to assess things directly rather than to perform either friendliness or wariness. He was wearing a sweatshirt with a diagram of the Milky Way on the front. His notebook was under his arm. "You're here again," Milo said. "I am." "Mom said you might come." He considered this. She didn't say why. I like bookstores, Dante said. It was the lamest thing he'd said in recent memory. He was aware of that. Milo looked at him with the expression of someone who has been told a thing that is technically true, but is clearly not the whole truth, and who is deciding whether to press it. You don't look like someone who likes bookstores, he said finally. You look like someone who works. What does someone who works look like? Like they're always thinking about something that isn't in the room. Milo sat down on the floor near the doorway, cross-legged, notebook open on his knees. My mom looks like that sometimes, but she also likes the store. You don't look like you like the store. I like it more than I expected to. Milo appeared to accept this as a marginal improvement. He looked down at his notebook. I'm working on a problem, he said, with the tone of someone who doesn't particularly need a response, but also doesn't object to one. What kind of problem? About light. How we measure distance in space using light years. But the thing is, he looked up, suddenly animated, the full-body engagement of a child whose mind had locked onto something. The thing is, the further away something is, the older the light we see from it. So when astronomers say they're looking at a galaxy 13 billion light years away, they're actually looking at what that galaxy looked like 13 billion years ago. It might not even exist anymore. Dante said nothing for a moment. You're bothered by that. Aren't you? Milo looked at him with genuine puzzlement. You're looking at something that might be gone. You think you're seeing something real, but you're actually seeing a memory. The universe is full of memories that look like the present. Dante sat with that for a moment. Yeah, he said quietly. That bothers me. Something shifted in Milo's expression, the small recalibration of a child who has found an unexpected point of contact. He looked back at his notebook. Most adults say that's just how it is. They stop being bothered by it. I think that's a mistake, Dante said. Milo nodded seriously. Me too. Elena appeared in the back room doorway. She had been listening. Dante could tell from the quality of her stillness when she stepped into the frame, and whatever she had heard had moved something in her face that she was now carefully reassembling into neutrality. She looked at her son. Dinner in 20 minutes. Finish your notes. Milo went back to writing. Elena looked at Dante. He looked back at her. Nothing was said. Nothing needed to be, right at that moment. The silence was not comfortable. It was full of everything that hadn't been resolved and wouldn't be quickly. But it was not hostile either. It was the silence of two people who were in the same room with the same impossible thing and were, for the moment, just enduring it together. Dante left at 5. He walked back to the car in the cold blue evening and sat in the driver's seat. He'd driven himself today, no Marcus, and put both hands on the wheel and breathed for a while. His phone buzzed. Reeves. Something you should know. Come in tonight. He met Reeves at the restaurant on North Clark at 8. Private room, same as always. Reeves was already there when Dante arrived, standing near the window with a glass of water and the expression of a man who had rehearsed what he was about to say and was now discovering that the rehearsal hadn't fully prepared him. Dante sat down. What is it? I need to tell you something, Reeves said, and I need you to hear it before you react. Then tell me. Reeves sat down across from him. He set his water glass down with the particular care of someone buying themselves a half second. The Cicero operation, the outside money pressing at the west side. I know where it comes from, Dante said. Victor. Reeves's jaw tightened, a small, involuntary thing. You know. I found it 3 days ago. What about it? There's more than that. Reeves met his eyes. The Cicero money isn't just pressure, it's a setup. Victor's been building a case, documentation, financial records, recorded conversations that he's been accumulating for 2 years, designed to look like you've been operating independently of any oversight, running money through channels that would look like tax fraud, RICO exposure. He's been constructing a liability. Dante went very still. Why? Because if you ever became a problem, if you ever started looking at things he didn't want you to look at, he'd have a mechanism to hand you to federal investigators without it coming back to him. He'd be the one who reported a concern. He'd come out as cooperative. You'd come out as... Reeves stopped. It's his insurance policy. On you. The room was quiet. Dante could feel his own heartbeat in a way he usually couldn't, the specific thud of it in his chest, the way it pushed against the inside of his ribs. "How long have you known this?" he said. Reeves didn't answer immediately. The silence was 4 seconds long. 4 seconds in which Dante looked at the man across from him. 22 years, the longest relationship in the organization, the person who knew more about the day-to-day architecture of everything than anyone else, and understood, with the cold clarity of a lock clicking open, exactly what that silence meant. "Reeves. I've known for 18 months, Reeves said quietly. Victor came to me. He told me he needed someone inside who would keep him informed about your movements, your decisions, anything related to—" He paused. "The woman, or the child." Dante did not move. "He told me it was protective," Reeves continued, "that he was monitoring a situation that could expose the whole organization. I believed him, for a while. Or I told myself I did." He looked at his hands. "I was wrong. I know that. I'm telling you now because I'm already looking," Dante said. His voice was very quiet, the quietest it had been in this conversation, which made it the most dangerous. "Because you know I'm going to find it anyway, and you're trying to get ahead of it." Reeves said nothing, which was its own answer. "What have you told him?" Dante said. "In the last week, specifically." "That you pulled the financial records. That you found the letter." A pause. "That you went to the bookstore, that you spoke to the woman." Dante sat back in his chair. He looked at the ceiling for a moment, just long enough to do the calculation, and then looked back at Reeves with an expression that made Reeves, who was not a man who frightened easily, shift backward slightly in his seat. "Victor knows I've been to the store," Dante said. "Yes." "He knows I'm reconnecting with Elena and the boy." "Yes." "And you told him this in the last 72 hours. The day before yesterday." Dante stood up. He moved to the door and stopped with his hand on the frame. "You're done," he said. "You're out of the organization as of tonight. You don't contact anyone on the inside. You don't contact Victor. You stay available to me, and you tell me everything you told him, every conversation, every detail, in writing, by tomorrow morning. If you do that, we're square. If you don't—" He stopped. "Don't make me finish that sentence." He walked out without looking back. In the hallway, he called Marcus. "Where is Victor tonight?" "Home, as far as I know. Why?" "Stay on it. I need to know where he is every hour." He was already moving toward the exit. "And Marcus, check on the bookstore. Drive past Maplewood. Tell me what you see." "Right now?" "Right now." He was in his car when Marcus called back. 7 minutes later. "Dante?" Marcus's voice had a quality in it that Dante had heard maybe twice in 6 years, a quality that meant pay attention to what I'm about to say. "There's a car parked across from the bookstore. Dark blue sedan. No plates. Engine off. Been there at least an hour, neighbor says." Dante's hand tightened on the phone. "Is the store still open?" "Lights are on in the apartment upstairs. Store's dark." "She's up there," Dante said. "Elena and Milo are up there." "Looks like it." He was already pulling out of the parking lot. "Move the car," he said. "Whoever's in it, move them. I don't care how. Get them away from that block." "If I do that, Victor knows we made the car." "I know. Do it anyway." He accelerated onto North Clark. "I'm 7 minutes out." Marcus said, "There's something else." Dante said, "Say it." "The car isn't alone. There's a second one. East end of the block. I didn't see it at first because it's in the alley." The cold that moved through Dante then had nothing to do with the November air coming through the climate vents. It was the cold of a man who had been in enough dangerous situations to recognize the configuration of one, the specific geometry of 2 vehicles on opposite ends of a block, covering both exits. "This isn't surveillance," Dante said. "No," Marcus said. "It's not." "How long do I have?" "I don't know. Could be tonight. Could be they're waiting for the lights to go off upstairs." "Get me there," Dante said, and pushed the accelerator to the floor. He ran 2 red lights on the way. He was 4 blocks out when his phone rang. Not Marcus, a number he didn't recognize, and he answered it on instinct. Victor's voice came through, and it was different from any version of Victor's voice Dante had heard before. No warmth, no performance, just the voice of a man who had decided to stop maintaining the architecture. "I know where you're going," Victor said. "Call them off." "Listen to me very carefully, Dante. What you're doing right now, going to that woman, building a connection to that child, is going to destroy everything, not just our operation. Everything. The federal case I've been building as insurance is one phone call from becoming active. I have 2 years of documentation that paints you in ways that would mean 15 to 20 years. I'm not threatening you. I'm telling you the reality of the situation." Dante said nothing. He was driving. "Walk away from Maplewood Street," Victor said. "Tonight, permanently. Go home. And I will call my people off, and none of this needs to go further. You go back to what you're good at. I stay where I am. The woman and the child continue their lives without interference. You put a car outside her building. I put a car outside a building to protect my interests. She has a child in that apartment, Victor. Then this is very simple." Victor's voice was very level. "Walk away, and the child stays safe. Press this, and I cannot control what happens next. Those are the only options." 3 blocks out, 2. "You told me," Dante said, "when I was 23 years old and my father had just died, that family was the only thing that mattered. You said it at the funeral. You said it at every dinner for the next decade. You built everything we did on that word." "Dante, you have 1 minute to call your people off that block," Dante said. 1 minute. After that, whatever happens is on you." He ended the call. He turned onto Maplewood Street. The dark blue sedan was exactly where Marcus had described it, parked with its nose toward the bookstore, the streetlight catching the slight gloss of its roof. As Dante came down the block, he could see the shape of someone in the driver's seat. 1 person, possibly 2. He pulled up behind the sedan and stopped. He got out of the car. The driver's door of the sedan opened at the same time, and the man who stepped out was not Carver. Dante didn't know Carver, but was someone else entirely. Someone Dante recognized from the edges of his own organization, a face he'd seen at Victor's side 3 years ago at an event he now wished he'd paid more attention to. The man looked at Dante without surprise. He had been told, apparently, to expect this. "Mr. Calloway," the man said, and his voice was the careful neutral of someone following a script that included this exact scenario. "You should go home." Dante looked at him. Then he looked past him, up at the lit window on the 2nd floor of the building beside the bookstore. The curtain moved slightly. A draft. Or someone inside near the window. He thought about Milo at his blue desk, filling pages with questions about the distance between things in the age of light. He thought about Elena's voice. "If anything from your world touches this building, this block, this boy." He looked back at the man in front of him. "There are 2 ways this goes," Dante said. "The way where you get in your car and drive away, and the way where you don't. I'm asking you to think carefully about which one you want." The man's hand moved toward his jacket. Dante moved first. What happened in the next 90 seconds was not something Dante had planned, and was not something he could have fully articulated afterward. It was reflex and training and the specific economy of a man who had grown up in violent rooms and learned very early that hesitation was the most expensive mistake available. The man went down. The second person in the sedan, a woman, which Dante hadn't expected, threw the passenger door open and ran, which was the smartest decision she made that evening. The car in the alley on the east end of the block started its engine, and Dante turned toward the sound of it, and for a moment the whole block held its breath. The alley car pulled out and drove away. Dante stood in the middle of Maplewood Street in the cold November night, his hands at his sides, his breathing elevated, and looked up at the 2nd floor window of the building beside Whitmore's books. The curtain moved again. He could see her silhouette, Elena, standing close to the glass, looking down at the street. He couldn't see her face clearly from this angle, but he could see that she wasn't moving, wasn't running, was standing at the window and looking down at the street where a man was on the ground. and another car was driving away, and Dante Calloway was standing in the middle of the road, like the most expensive mistake she'd almost made, was still standing there asking her to trust him. His phone buzzed. Marcus. Victor's left his apartment, car headed north. He typed back, "Track him. Don't lose him." Then he looked back up at the window. The curtain fell back into place. 20 seconds later, his phone rang. Her name on the screen. She'd saved his number sometime in the past week without telling him. He answered. Elena. Her voice was very controlled, the extreme control of someone who has just experienced something frightening and is managing the fear with both hands. What just happened on my street? Are you and Milo all right? Answer me. You're not safe here, he said. Not tonight. I need you to pack what you need for a few days, and I need you to come downstairs. I have somewhere you can go. I'm not going anywhere with you. I know. He kept his voice level, steady as he could make it. I know this is the last thing you wanted. I know this is exactly what you told me not to bring to your door. I understand all of that. And I'm telling you that the person who did this is someone I trusted and someone I was wrong to trust. And I am asking, not telling, to let me get you somewhere safe while I fix it. Silence on the line. Milo's scared, she said, very quietly. He heard something. He won't tell me what he thinks it was, but he heard it. I know. I'm sorry. A long pause. He heard her breathe, heard the deliberate quality of it, the breath of someone choosing. 10 minutes, she said. We'll be downstairs in 10 minutes. He said, I'll be at the door. He ended the call and stood on the cold street and understood with complete clarity that the thing he had wanted, the careful, slow, possible thing he had been trying to construct, was gone. There was no slow version of this anymore. No careful version. Victor had made sure of that. And somewhere in the city tonight, Victor Calloway was in a car headed north. And Dante didn't know yet where he was going, but he knew what it meant that he was moving. It meant Victor had decided that waiting was no longer an option, that the situation had reached the point where his next move needed to be decisive and final, and impossible to walk back from. Which meant Dante had until Victor stopped moving to decide what he was going to do. He looked at the lit window one more time. He thought about a letter that had been written 9 years ago and never delivered. He thought about a boy who believed that the universe was full of memories that looked like the present. He thought about his uncle's voice on the phone, calm, certain. The voice of a man who had never once, in 40 years of making decisions about other people's lives, stopped to ask whether he had the right. Dante picked up his phone. He called a number he had never called from his personal phone before. A number that, when it answered, would set in motion something that couldn't be undone, that would burn down the architecture of the last 12 years as surely as any fire, that would cost him more than he had currently calculated. The phone rang once. A man answered. This is Special Agent Thorne, the voice said. Who am I speaking with? And Dante Calloway, standing on a cold Chicago street outside a bookstore with a child's solar system stickers in the window, said his own name out loud for the first time to a federal agent, and felt the ground shift permanently beneath everything he had built. Special Agent Thorne was 38 years old and had been working organized crime cases out of the Chicago field office for 11 years. And in 11 years, he had received exactly one phone call like this one. A principal, not an informant, not a lawyer, not a third-party intermediary, but the actual person at the center of an open investigation calling from his personal phone and saying his own name without being asked. He had learned over 11 years not to let surprise show in his voice. Mr. Calloway, Thorne said, this is unexpected. I need 48 hours, Dante said. He was still standing on Maplewood Street. The man on the ground had not moved. The night air was very cold and very still, and Dante's breath made small white clouds that disappeared as fast as they formed. I need 48 hours, and I need a protection detail on a civilian address. Woman and a child. Tonight. That's not how this works. I know how it works. I'm telling you what I need, and I'm telling you what I'm prepared to give you in exchange. A pause. I'm listening. Victor Calloway. Full operational picture. Financial architecture, front companies, the federal liability he's been building as leverage on me, 2 years of documentation he's been constructing, the Cicero connection, names, accounts, The man he's been using for physical work. He paused. Everything. Thorne was quiet for 3 seconds. In Dante's experience, federal agents were quiet for 3 seconds when they were trying not to sound as interested as they were. And what do you want in return? Immunity for the woman, Elena Whitmore. She has no criminal involvement. You can verify that she's clean. But I need it in writing before I say another word. And the 48 hours. And the protection details starting now. The 48 hours is for what? Victor's in a car headed somewhere tonight. He's making a move. I need to be ahead of it before you move on him, or he burns everything and you get nothing. And you know where he's going. Not yet, but I will. He looked at the building beside him. Do we have a deal or not, Agent Thorne? Another pause, longer this time. Dante could hear the specific quality of a man on the other end of a phone, making a calculation he was going to have to justify to people above him, and was choosing his level of confidence carefully. I need to make a call, Thorne said. Give me 20 minutes. You have 50. He ended the call and turned to look at the door of the building. As he did, it opened and Elena came through it first. Coat on, a bag over one shoulder. Her face arranged in the specific expression of a woman who has made a decision she's not entirely sure about and has decided to hold to it anyway. Behind her came Milo, backpack on, navy blue jacket, the solar system stickers catching the streetlight. The boy stopped on the sidewalk and looked at the man on the ground. He looked at Dante. Did you do that? He asked. Yes, Dante said. No point in anything else. Milo considered this with the same steady assessment he brought to everything. Is he dead? No, he'll have a headache. Why did you Milo. Elena's hand found her son's shoulder. Not now. The boy looked at his mother, then back at Dante, and then, in a movement so small it might have been involuntary, he stepped slightly closer to Dante's side of the sidewalk than his mother's, as if making a calculation of his own, in his own 8-year-old terms, about where the protection was coming from tonight. Dante felt that small movement in his chest like a hand pressing against a bruise. Come on, he said quietly. I have somewhere safe. The somewhere safe was an apartment in Wicker Park that Dante maintained under a different name and that appeared in no documentation connected to the Callaway organization. The kind of contingency that men in his position kept ready without ever expecting to need. The way certain people kept emergency bags by their doors. Marcus had the address. No one else. He put Elena and Milo there at 10:15 and stood in the doorway while Elena looked around the space. Clean, furnished simply, nothing personal, with the expression of a woman assessing a room for exits. How long? She said. I don't know yet. 2 days, maybe? Milo has school. I know. She looked at him. What is happening? He told her enough. Not everything. Not the call to Thorne, not the full shape of what he was setting in motion. But enough. Victor. The threat. The fact that the people outside her building tonight were there because of choices Dante had made and should have made differently and was now trying to fix. She listened without interrupting, which was harder than it looked. He could see the effort of it. When he finished, she said, You brought this here. Yes. You told me you wouldn't. I know. I was wrong to believe I could keep them separate. He held her gaze. I'm not asking you to forgive that right now. I'm asking you to stay put and let me fix it. A long pause. From the bedroom, the sound of Milo unpacking his backpack, the specific rustling of a child making a temporary space feel workable. Fix it, Elena said, and then we talk about everything else. Agreed. He left Marcus outside the building and drove. Keat, Thorne called back at 10:47. We have a deal. Provisional immunity for Elena Whitmore in writing by tomorrow morning. Protection detail is already en route to the address your man texted us. A pause. You have 48 hours, Callaway. Not 49. Understood. Where's Victor Callaway tonight? Still working on that. He hung up and immediately called Marcus's secondary contact, a man named Dev who ran a different kind of information operation and who owed Dante a significant favor from 3 years ago. Victor's car, dark gray Escalade, plates, he gave the number from memory, headed north from Lakeshore Drive as of 10 o'clock. Where is it now? Dev came back in 4 minutes. Evanston, northwestern area, parked at a private address on Sheridan Road. Dante knew the address before Dev finished saying it. It was a house that had belonged to a man named Garrett Foss, a retired federal judge, golf buddy of Victor's. The kind of social connection that existed in the dim space between the legitimate world and the one Dante operated in. Foss had died 2 years ago. The house had passed to his son, who was a prosecutor in the Northern District of Illinois. Dante pulled over. Victor wasn't running. Victor was visiting a prosecutor. He was activating the insurance. Dante had thought he had 48 hours. He had been wrong about that. He called Thorne back immediately. Victor Calloway is at a residential address in Evanston, Sheridan Road. He's meeting with someone in the Northern District. I don't know the name yet, but he's activating a prepared documentation package. 2 years of financial records designed to frame me for RICO violations. If that package gets filed in the next few hours, your deal with me becomes complicated. Thorne's voice went sharp and efficient. Address. Dante gave it. What are you going to do? What we do, Thorne said. Stay out of the way. I can't do that. Calloway. There are people in that building, Dante said. Not just Victor. If your people roll up with badges and lights, Victor burns the documentation before you get through the door. He's been planning this for 2 years. He has a protocol. A silence. What are you suggesting? Thorne said carefully. I'm suggesting you let me go in first. I get the documentation. I get him talking. You have people outside and you come in when I give the signal. He paused. He'll talk to me. He won't talk to you. Not tonight, not until he's lawyered up for a week. But he'll talk to me. You're asking me to let a civilian. I'm not a civilian, and we both know it. Dante was already back on the road. Give me 30 minutes. After that, come in whether I've signaled or not. Thorne's silence lasted 5 seconds. You're not authorized to... I know. Are you going to stop me? 6 seconds. 30 minutes, Thorne said. And Calloway? Whatever happens in that house, I wasn't part of it. Understood. Bisham. The house on Sheridan Road was large and set back from the street. The kind of old Evanston money that expressed itself in understatement, good bones, mature trees, a porch light that suggested welcome without demanding it. Victor's Escalade was in the driveway. One other car, unfamiliar. Dante parked 2 houses down and walked. He went around the side of the house, through a gate that was unlocked because the late Garrett Foss had been the kind of man who trusted his neighborhood, and came in through the back. The kitchen door was locked, but the window beside it was not latched all the way. And Dante had grown up in houses where knowing which windows were which was a survival skill, and he was through it in under a minute. The house was quiet, a lamp on in the front room. Voices from somewhere toward the right, a study or a library from the sound of it. 2 voices. Victor and a man whose voice Dante didn't recognize. He moved through the kitchen, through a hallway. He stopped outside the door of the room where the voices were. Victor was saying, needs to be filed tonight, not tomorrow. The moment Dante makes contact with Thorne's office, and I believe he already has, the window is... Dante pushed open the door. The room was a study. Bookshelves, a desk, a leather chair, a fireplace going. Victor was standing. Across from him, seated at the desk with a briefcase open in front of him, was a man in his mid-40s, suit without a tie. The look of someone called out of an evening at home on short notice. He looked up when Dante came through the door with the expression of a man who had just realized he was in a different situation than he thought he was in. Victor turned. His face did the calculation fast. The arrival of Dante, the hour, the fact that Dante had found this address, and arrived at a place that was past surprise, past the performance of surprise, straight into the flat acknowledgement of a man who has been outmaneuvered and knows it. Dante, he said, not warm, not performing anything. Sit down, Victor. You shouldn't be here. Sit down. The man at the desk started to rise. Dante looked at him. You, close the briefcase. Don't touch anything in it. Sit back down. He looked at the man steadily until the man sat. Then he moved into the room and positioned himself between the 2 of them and the door, the way he'd positioned himself in rooms since he was young, always knowing where the exit was and making sure it was his. The documentation in that briefcase, Dante said. How much of it is fabricated? Victor sat down slowly in the armchair near the fireplace. He looked older in this light than he did in restaurants and meeting rooms. Or maybe Dante was just looking at him differently. None of it is fabricated, Victor said. That's what you don't understand. Everything in there is real. Every transaction, every record. I didn't invent anything. I just positioned it. Positioned it to look like something it wasn't. Positioned it to look like what it was, absent context. Victor leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and for a moment, just a moment, he looked like the man Dante had known at dinner tables for 20 years, the man who had sat with him after his father's funeral and told him the world was still navigable if you were smart and careful. Dante, I am trying to tell you something important. Everything I have done, the letter, the records, all of it, was to protect this organization, to protect you even when you couldn't see that protection for what it was. You put a car outside a building with a child in it. Victor's jaw tightened. To pressure you, not to harm. There is no version of that sentence that ends in a way I'm willing to hear. Dante's voice was very quiet. The quietest it had been, which in his experience was when people in the room with him became most alert. Give me the briefcase. Dante, give me the briefcase, Victor, or I open that front door right now and the people outside come in, and you explain yourself to them, and everything in that case becomes evidence in a federal proceeding instead of something we handle between us. Victor looked at him. A long, reading look. The look of a man trying to determine whether the person across from him has actually crossed a line or is performing the crossing of it. Dante held the look without blinking and without moving, and after 10 seconds, Victor reached across and picked up the briefcase from the desk in front of the man who had not spoken and who appeared to be reconsidering all of his life choices, and held it out. Dante took it. He opened it. Inside, a hard drive, a printed document set, 3 inches thick, bound with a clip, and a sealed envelope addressed to the Northern District Clerk's office. He took the hard drive and put it in his jacket pocket. He took the document set. He left the envelope. The drive and the documents, he said. This is everything? There's a copy, Victor said. Dante looked at him. Cloud backup, Victor said. I'm not an idiot. Give me the access. And then what? You walk out of here and I face nothing? You get to decide how this ends? Yes, Dante said. That's exactly what happens. Victor laughed. It was a short, hard sound, not warm at all. The laugh of a man who has run out of better responses. You've decided you're better than me, he said. You've known this woman and this child for what, 2 weeks? And you've decided that everything I built, everything I sacrificed, means nothing compared to... I'm not better than you, Dante said. I'm just done being you. The sentence landed in the room and stayed there. Victor looked at him for a long moment. Something moved through his face. Not regret exactly, but the acknowledgement of a man who has looked at the end of something and recognized it for what it is. He gave Dante the cloud access. A login, a password, spoken aloud in a room that was very quiet. Dante deleted the backup from his phone where he stood, watching the confirmation screen, making sure. Then he moved to the door and opened it. In the hallway, 3 people. Thorne and 2 agents Dante didn't know, moving fast, weapons drawn but pointed down. Thorne looked at Dante, then at the room behind him, then back at Dante. Your 30 minutes were 28, Thorne said. I work fast. Dante handed him the document set and the hard drive. Victor Calloway. The man at the desk is a witness. I don't know what he knows, but I'd ask him before he remembers he needs a lawyer. Thorne looked at the material in his hands. This is everything, 2 years of it. Dante moved past him toward the front door. We're square, Agent Thorne. Calloway. Thorne's voice stopped him at the door. The immunity agreement covers the woman. It doesn't cover you. I know, Dante said. We'll deal with that separately. He walked out into the cold Evanston night. He sat in his car for a while before starting it. His hands were not shaking. He'd half expected them to, and they weren't, which told him something about where he was, past the point where adrenaline was in charge, past the point where his body was reacting. He was just tired. The specific heavy tiredness of someone who has been carrying something for a long time and has put it down and is now feeling the absence of the weight. His phone buzzed. Marcus. All quiet at the apartment. Boys asleep. Woman still up. He typed back, I'm coming. He started the car. He was 2 blocks from the Wicker Park apartment when his phone rang again. Unknown number. Different. Unknown number. Not the one Elena had used, not Thorne, not anyone in his contacts. He almost didn't answer. He answered. Carver's voice came through. The man Victor had sent to look at the bookstore. The man who had been given the Tuesday instruction. Go in after closing, after they're out. And who Dante did not know existed and had not accounted for. Mr. Calloway, Carver said, I think you've had a busy night. Dante's hand tightened on the wheel. I had an arrangement with your uncle, Carver said. That arrangement has been disrupted. Victor's people reached out an hour ago to tell me the situation had changed. A pause. I don't like when situations change after I've started a job. It leaves me in an awkward position professionally. What do you want? Dante said. What I was going to get paid. The voice was calm and practical, the voice of a man discussing a transaction. Victor was going to pay me to handle something. Victor is now unavailable. I'm an independent contractor, Mr. Calloway. I complete jobs. I don't leave things half done. The job is off. That's not how it works. I'll pay you twice what Victor was paying. A pause. That's a generous offer. Take it and walk away. Here's my problem, Carver said, and his voice stayed calm, practical, the voice of a professional explaining a professional concern. I looked into you tonight while I was waiting. You called a federal agent. I have a contact who monitors that kind of communication. You called Thorne's personal line at 10:47, which means you're cooperating. A pause. Which means everyone connected to Victor Calloway is going to be looked at. Which means I need to make sure there's nothing that connects me to this particular job. No witnesses. No loose ends. The cold went through Dante like a current. The bookstore, he said. I'm standing outside it right now, Carver said. And Dante could hear it in the background. The faint sound of wind, of a street at night. The woman and the child aren't here, which is inconvenient. But you know where they are, don't you? Dante was already doing a U-turn in the middle of the street, tires screaming on the cold asphalt. Don't, Dante said. His voice came out raw in a way he hadn't heard from himself in years. Whatever Victor was paying you, I will triple it. Right now, cash. Tonight. You walk away and you never hear my name again, and I never hear yours. Where are they, Mr. Calloway? If you touch them, where are they? Dante ran a red light. The Wicker Park apartment was 6 minutes away. 6 minutes. He pushed the car to a speed that made the engine pitch differently, that made the streetlights streak. He called Marcus with his other hand, phone between his ear and his shoulder. Marcus picked up on the first ring. There's a man coming, Dante said. Right now, get them out of the building. Don't use the front door, fire escape, back, whatever. Get them out and get moving and call me when you're clear. Dante. Right now, Marcus, move. He heard the line go active on Marcus's end. The sound of him moving, the apartment door, Elena's voice asking something sharp and alert. Marcus saying we have to go, right now. Come on. Dante drove. 5 minutes. The city blurring past, the traffic lights, the turns. His own heartbeat very loud. Marcus called back at the 4-minute mark. We're out. Back exit. Moving east on foot. Stay on the phone. Keep moving. Where's the boy? With us. He's... A pause, the sound of movement. He's keeping up. He's okay. Keep moving. He reached the building at the 5-minute mark and came out of the car at a run, and he saw it before he'd fully processed it. The front door of the building not forced, but standing open, the light in the lobby on. Carver had already been inside. He went in. The lobby was clear. The stairwell door was swinging on its return hinge. Dante took the stairs 2 at a time to the 2nd floor and came out into the hallway and stopped. The apartment door was open. He went through it fast, low, moving to the right the way he'd learned in rooms that might have people in them. Into the main room, clear. Into the kitchen, clear, bedroom door. He pushed it open. The room was empty. The bed was unmade. Milo had been sleeping in it, the covers pushed back, his notebook on the pillow where he'd fallen asleep with it. The window was open, the fire escape visible, the cold air coming in. Marcus had gotten them out. He exhaled. He turned around. Carver was in the doorway of the bedroom. He had come up the fire escape on the other side of the building and come in through the front room window while Dante was clearing the bedroom, and he was standing in the doorway now with a patience that was the most frightening thing about him. The patience of someone who was not excited or afraid, who was just working. "They're gone," Dante said. "Yes." Carver looked at him. "That leaves just you." "That works for me," Dante said. What happened next was not clean or cinematic. It was two men in a small room who both understood what the situation was. And it was fast, and it was brutal, and it involved a lamp and a dresser corner, and Dante's elbow connecting with something that made a sound he felt more than heard. And Carver was good, trained in a way that was specific and professional. But Dante had grown up in rooms where being good was not the same as surviving them, and he was still standing at the end of it, breathing in ragged pulls, his side screaming where Carver had landed something solid against his ribs, his hand bleeding from the lamp. Carver was on the floor, breathing. Dante could see the rise and fall of it. He stood over him for a moment, his own chest heaving, sweat and blood, the cold air from the open window hitting his face. He picked up his phone from where it had fallen. He called Thorne. "I have someone you want," he said. "Wicker Park." He gave the address. He was working for Victor. He came for the woman and the child. He breathed. "Bring a medical unit." "Are you—" "I'm standing," Dante said. "That's enough." He sat down on the floor of the empty bedroom with his back against the bed frame and his knees up and his hands hanging between them. And he breathed, and he looked at the open notebook on the pillow. Milo's notebook, left behind in the hurry, lying there with its pages open to a drawing of the solar system that filled the whole page, each planet labeled in careful 8-year-old handwriting, the distances between them noted in the margins. He reached up and took the notebook from the pillow. He held it in his bloody hands and looked at the drawing. Outside, somewhere in the Wicker Park streets, Marcus was moving with Elena and Milo, keeping them together, keeping them going. He didn't know where yet. He didn't know what came next. Not in the next hour, not in the days after, not in the longer shape of what his life looked like now that he had handed the last 12 years of it to a federal agent on a phone and burned it. He knew the notebook was in his hands. He knew the boy who'd made it was alive. He knew that in the morning, when the light came back, there was going to be an accounting, with Thorne, with whatever remained of the organization, with Elena, with the full weight of what he'd done and what it would cost and what it meant. And he was going to have to stand in that accounting and not flinch from any of it. But right now, in this empty room, with the cold air coming through the window and sirens starting somewhere below, he was just sitting on the floor holding a child's notebook and breathing, and that was enough, and it was going to have to be. His phone lit up. "Marcus, we're safe. Boy's asking where you are." Dante stared at that last line for a long moment. Then he typed back, "Tell him I'm coming." He put the notebook inside his jacket, against his chest, next to where the letter had been. He got up. The hospital they took him to was not the nearest one. Marcus had made that call. The nearest hospital was on record as a place the Callaway organization used, which meant it was a place that reporters and certain federal observers had learned to check when something was happening, and tonight was not a night for that kind of attention. So Marcus drove an extra 8 minutes north, which meant Dante sat in the back seat of the car with a folded jacket pressed against his ribs and his eyes on the city moving past the windows, and his breathing the shallow, careful breathing of a man who had learned through experience that deep breaths with damaged ribs were a choice you made once and then regretted. Elena was in the front seat. Milo was beside Dante in the back, sitting very straight, his backpack on his lap, watching Dante with the specific focused attention of someone running a calculation they haven't finished yet. Nobody spoke for the first 3 minutes. Then Milo said, "How bad is it?" "I've had worse," Dante said. "That's not an answer to how bad it is. 2, maybe 3 ribs, probably not broken. Cracked, maybe." "That sounds bad." "It's manageable." Milo was quiet for a moment. Then, "Were you scared?" Dante looked at him. In the moving light of the city, streetlights, headlights, the occasional blaze of a lit storefront, the boy's face was very serious and very young and very familiar in the way that faces you shared blood with were familiar even when you'd only known them for 2 weeks. "Yes," Dante said. "What were you scared of?" "That Marcus wouldn't get you out in time." Milo absorbed this. He looked at the back of his mother's head, then back at Dante. "He did, though. He did. So it worked out." "This part did," Dante said. Elena said nothing from the front seat, but her hand, which had been resting on the console, tightened slightly and then released. None. The hospital took 3 hours. Dante had 2 cracked ribs, not broken, which the attending physician explained with the specific cheerfulness of someone delivering relatively good news in a context where it was still bad news, and a laceration on his left hand that required 4 stitches and produced a quantity of blood that was disproportionate to its actual severity. He was given painkillers he accepted and instructions to rest. He accepted less convincingly, and at 2:15 in the morning he came out of the treatment area into the waiting room where Elena was sitting with Milo asleep across 2 chairs, the boy's head on her thigh, her hand moving slowly through his hair. She looked up. She looked at the bandaged hand and the way he was holding his torso with the careful immobility of the recently injured, and she said nothing for a moment, just looked at him with an expression that had moved past the controlled management she usually deployed and arrived somewhere raw and less arranged. "Sit down," she said quietly. "You look terrible." He sat in the chair across from her, moving slowly. "What happens now?" she said. Her voice was very low, not to wake Milo. "I have a meeting with Thorne tomorrow afternoon. I'll be there for a while." He paused. "There's going to be a process. Cooperating with a federal investigation it takes time. There will be legal proceedings connected to Victor, to the organization." He looked at his bandaged hand. "To me." "To you," she said. Meaning I spent 12 years running something that I knew was illegal, and I'm going to have to account for that. The immunity agreement covers you. It doesn't cover me." He met her eyes. "I'm not walking away clean. I want you to understand that." She held his gaze steadily. "What does not clean mean?" "I don't know the full shape of it yet. Reduced charges, probably. Some kind of arrangement, given what I'm providing. My lawyer will be in the room tomorrow." He paused. "It could mean time. I don't know how much." A silence. Milo shifted in his sleep, a small, restless movement, and Elena's hand adjusted automatically. The specific unconscious competence of a mother who had been doing this for 8 years. "You're telling me this now," she said, "at 2 in the morning in a hospital waiting room. I'm telling you now because I said I was going to be honest with you, and I'm going to be honest with you even when the timing is bad." He looked at her. "You deserve to know what you're dealing with, what Milo is potentially dealing with, before you decide anything." She looked at him for a long moment. "You think I'm going to run? I think you have every right to." "I've been running for 8 years, she said quietly. "I'm tired." She looked down at her son's sleeping face. "I'm not saying I've decided anything. I'm saying I'm not going to make any decision tonight in a hospital at 2 in the morning, and neither are you." She looked back up. "Tomorrow exists. We deal with tomorrow. He nodded. They sat in the quiet of the waiting room, the hum of the building around them, the occasional sound from the nurse's station, Milo's slow, even breathing. And Dante sat with his cracked ribs and his bandaged hand and the notebook still inside his jacket, and did not try to say anything else, because there was nothing else that needed saying right now. And Elena had told him what the next hours looked like. And for the first time in longer than he could measure, he let someone else's read of the situation stand without revising it. Thorne's office was on the 14th floor of a federal building downtown, and it looked exactly like what it was. A room where the government did paperwork about the things people did outside. Institutional carpet, fluorescent light, a window that looked out over a parking structure. Dante sat across from Thorne with his lawyer, a woman named Park, who had represented him on 3 prior occasions and who had the specific gift of making rooms feel like she owned them without doing anything obvious to establish that. And the meeting lasted 4 hours and 20 minutes. Victor Calloway had been arrested at the Evanston house the previous night. He had said nothing on the record, which was his right, and had subsequently said a great deal off the record to his own legal team, which Dante's lawyer monitored through channels that were not entirely transparent, but were entirely functional. The documentation Dante had handed Thorne, both the physical set and the hard drive from which the deleted cloud backup had been partially reconstructed by the FBI's technical unit, was, in Thorne's carefully controlled words, substantial. Carver was in federal custody. He had, by morning, decided that cooperation was preferable to the alternative, and the names he provided over the course of a 4-hour interview established connections between Victor's operation and 3 separate incidents that the Chicago field office had opened files on, none of which had previously been closable. Thorne was, beneath the federal agent composure, visibly satisfied in the way of a man who has worked a case for a long time and watched it resolve. The arrangement for Dante was what his lawyer had predicted: a guilty plea to a reduced charge, cooperation credit applied, no additional prosecution for anything covered by the agreement. 18 months, minimum security, eligibility for early release at 12. His lawyer explained this with the specific neutral precision of someone who had delivered this kind of news before and understood that the human response to it was variable and needed space. Dante sat with it for a moment. 18 months. 12 with good behavior. He thought about a blue desk in the back of a bookstore. He thought about a boy who would be 9, then 10, before Dante came home. "Okay," he said. Park looked at him. "Dante, we can push for—" "No," he said. "We don't push. I did what I did. I'm not going to spend the next 2 years arguing about it in motions." He looked at Thorne. "I want the agreement finalized by end of week. I want to know the reporting date." Thorne studied him for a moment with the look of a man who has spent his career expecting people in Dante's position to fight everything and was recalibrating. "End of week is manageable," he said. "Good." Dante stood slowly, his ribs making the movement a considered one. "Then I have things to do." He had 11 days. The first thing he did was sit down with Marcus and walk through the full operational inventory of the Calloway organization, not to preserve it, but to responsibly dismantle it. The people who worked legitimate edges, told, given references, moved on. The arrangements that were purely illegal, documented for Thorne as part of the cooperation agreement. The properties and assets turned over to the legal team for a process that would take months and that Dante would not be present for, but that he set in motion clearly enough that it would survive his absence. Marcus sat through all of it with the flat patience of a man who had decided, at some point in the past 24 hours, what his own position was going to be. "What are you going to do?" Dante asked him near the end of the 3rd day. Marcus considered. "My sister runs a logistics company in Indianapolis. She's been asking me to come run operations for 3 years. He looked at his hands. "I think I kept saying no because I thought this was the only thing I was good at." "Is that still what you think?" "No," Marcus said. "I don't think that anymore." They shook hands at the end of it. Marcus held on for a moment longer than was strictly necessary, and Dante let him. On the 4th day, he went back to Maplewood Street. The bookstore was closed. It had been closed since the night of the incident, a handwritten sign in the window saying "temporarily closed, back soon" in Elena's handwriting. The building showed no visible damage. Whatever Carver had been planning for Tuesday had never happened, which meant the store was intact, the back room intact, the blue desk and the low shelves and the careful notebook collection all still there, waiting. Dante stood outside and looked at the front window for a while. The children's display was still in place, the hand-lettered sign, the small curling corner of a poster advertising a reading event that had already happened. He called Elena. "I'm outside," he said. A pause. Then, "I know. I can see you from upstairs." Another pause. "Come around the side." The side door opened before he reached it. Not Elena, Milo, who had apparently appointed himself the door opener, standing in the frame in his school clothes with his notebook under his arm and an expression of serious assessment on his face. "You look better," Milo said. "I feel better." "Mom said you have to tell me something." He stepped back to let Dante in. "She said it had to come from you." They were in the narrow stairwell that led up to the apartment, and Dante stopped and looked down at the boy and understood that Elena had done the hardest and most generous thing available. She had decided that this conversation belonged to Dante, that she wasn't going to mediate or buffer or shape it, that whatever Dante was going to be in this boy's life needed to start with honesty spoken directly and not handed down through someone else. He sat down on the stairs, which put him at roughly Milo's eye level. Milo sat on the stair below him, cross-legged, notebook on his knees, looking at Dante with the calm, prepared attention of a child who has been told something important is coming and has decided to be ready for it. Dante looked at him. He had prepared things to say. He had spent the drive over thinking about them, arranging them, the way he arranged things in meetings. Clear, sequential, no unnecessary words. What came out was none of those things. "I'm your father," he said. "I didn't know about you until 2 weeks ago. It wasn't something your mother kept from me. It's complicated, and she'll explain more of it when you're older, but I want you to know it wasn't her choice. Someone kept us apart." He paused. "I'm not going to make you feel anything about this. You can take as long as you need to figure out what it means to you. I just needed you to know the truth." Milo sat very still. He looked at Dante's face for a long time, the same assessment he applied to things he was trying to understand. That full attention processing that made him seem older than 8 and exactly 8 simultaneously. "Is that why you came to the bookstore?" he said finally. "That first night?" "No, I didn't know then. I came because it was raining." "And then you found out." "And then I found out." "Because of the birthmark," Milo said. Dante went still. "You know about the birthmark." "I looked it up after you came the second time. I looked up birthmarks that run in families." He reached up and touched the side of his own neck, the place where the mark was. "You have the same one. I noticed the first day." He looked at Dante steadily. "I didn't tell Mom because I wasn't sure what it meant yet." Dante stared at him. "I'm 8, Milo said, with a tone that managed to be both matter-of-fact and slightly pointed. "I'm not oblivious." Dante made a sound that was close to a laugh, and not quite, because his ribs still made that a complicated proposition, and he put his hand over his eyes for a moment and breathed. "No," he said when he'd recovered. "You're definitely not oblivious." Milo looked at his notebook. He opened it to a page and looked at something there, and then closed it again. "Are you going to be around?" he said. "Or is this the kind of thing where someone tells you the true thing, and then they go away?" "I'm going to be around," Dante said. "There's going to be a period coming up soon where I'm not able to be here for a while. I'll explain that to you properly. I'm not going to hide it. But after that, I'm going to be around. If you want me to be." Milo considered this. "How long is a while?" "About a year, maybe less." The boy nodded slowly, with the deliberateness of someone filing information in the right category. Then he stood up, dusted off his jeans with a practicality that was entirely his mother's, and held out his hand. Dante looked at the small, serious, extended hand. He took it. They shook, formally, which was somehow the most moving thing that had happened in the entirety of the past 2 weeks, and Dante held on for a moment before Milo extracted his hand with the dignity of someone who had completed a transaction he was satisfied with. "Okay," Milo said. "Mom's making dinner. You should probably come up." He turned and went up the stairs without looking back. The way people who are confident they'll be followed don't look back. And Dante sat on the step for one more moment and then stood up, carefully, and followed him. Dinner was pasta. Elena cooked it in the small kitchen of the apartment above the bookstore with the efficient economy of someone who had made this particular meal 100 times, and Dante sat at the kitchen table and watched her, and did not offer to help because the kitchen was clearly hers, and offering would have been the wrong move. And instead he watched Milo at the corner of the table draw orbital calculations in his notebook while describing, without looking up, a theory he was developing about whether time moved at different speeds in different parts of the galaxy. Elena set a plate in front of Dante. She met his eyes for a moment, just a moment, and something passed between them that was not resolved and was not simple and was not going anywhere quickly, but was present and honest and alive in the way that things that have been through difficult weather are alive. stripped of the parts that were always going to fall away. She sat down. The three of them ate. On the seventh day, Dante went back to the bookstore alone, in the morning, before Elena opened it. She had given him a key the previous day without making a thing of it, just handed it to him at the end of an evening, the way you handed someone a key when you had decided, provisionally and carefully and without announcing the decision, that they were allowed in. He let himself in and stood in the store in the early morning quiet. He walked to the shelf near the back where he had first found the science book. He stood there for a while. The shelf was as it had been. The same disorganized abundance, the same sense that the books had arrived here through decades of accumulation and had settled into their positions like sediment. He pulled a book from the shelf at random and looked at it. Put it back. Pulled another. The Korean War book he'd bought that first night was at home on his kitchen shelf, which was the only shelf in his apartment with anything on it that felt personal now. He moved to the counter and sat on the stool behind it, Elena's stool, the one she stood on for hours each day, and looked at the store from her angle. From here, the store looked like what it was, a small, imperfect, necessary place, full of things that mattered to someone. He sat there for a while. When Elena came down at 9 to open, she found him behind the counter with a cup of coffee from the place 2 doors down and a list on a notepad he'd found under the register. She stopped, looked at the list. What is that? Structural things. The shelf on the east wall is pulling from the anchor. I can see it from here, probably been doing it for a while. The backroom lighting is inadequate for actual reading, which seems like a problem in a place where people read. The side door doesn't latch properly, which is a security issue that He paused. Notice differently than most people. Elena looked at the list and then at him. I have 9 days, Dante said. I'd like to spend some of them being useful. A long moment. She looked at him with the reading look, the one she had applied to everything since the first night. Measuring, honest, not performing acceptance or rejection, just looking at what was actually there. The shelf first, she said. It's been driving me crazy for 6 months. He fixed the shelf. He fixed the door latch. He spent 2 afternoons rebuilding the lighting in the back room with actual decent fixtures bought from the hardware store 3 blocks over. And Milo supervised this process with the focused interest of someone who understood that light quality affected reading quality and had opinions about the specific temperature of the bulbs. On the 9th day, Dante brought the science book from the special place Elena had put it, behind the counter, where it had lived since Milo left it there by accident the morning Dante first walked in, and carried it to the back room and set it on the lowest shelf of Milo's bookcase, between a book about black holes and a book about the history of the telescope. He stood back and looked at it there. Milo came in from school an hour later and dropped his backpack on the floor and went to the shelf. Not for the science book specifically, just for whatever he needed. And his hand passed over it and stopped, and he pulled it out and looked at it, and looked at Dante. You put it on the shelf, Milo said. It belongs there. Milo looked at the book. He turned it over once, the way he handled everything he wanted to understand, and then set it back on the shelf with the specific care of someone replacing something they intend to return to. I'm going to write more in it, he said, when I figure more things out. Good, Dante said. There's a lot of room in the margins. The night before Dante's reporting date, Elena closed the store early. She locked the front door at 5 and turned the sign and came behind the counter and stood with her hands flat on the surface and looked at Dante, who was sitting in the chair he'd come to occupy in the late afternoons, the one near the door to the back room, the one where the light was good, and Milo's humming was audible. Tomorrow, she said. Tomorrow. She looked at the counter surface for a moment. I kept a list, she said, all the things I was angry about, for the 8 years. She looked up. I'm not going to read it to you. Okay. I'm saying I had it. I want you to know it existed. I know it existed. And some of it, she paused, choosing carefully. Some of it I'm still carrying. I'm not going to pretend I'm not. A year from now, when you come back, it's not going to be simple. I know, he said. I'm not looking for simple. She held his gaze. What are you looking for? He thought about it. Actually thought about it, the way the question deserved. I'm looking for the chance to show up, he said finally. Not to undo what happened, not to make it even, just to show up, for as long as you'll let me, and be someone worth having around. Elena looked at him for a long time. Then she reached under the counter and brought out the letter. The original, the 4 pages, 9 years old, and set it between them on the counter. I kept this too, she said. He looked at it. I know. I want you to take it with you. She slid it toward him. When you come back, I want you to give it to me again. Not because I need you to, because I want to know that you read it, really read it, all the way through, in there, when you had time to think about it. Her voice was steady and quiet and completely honest, and that you understood what I was trying to say. He picked up the letter. He folded it along its creases. He put it in his inside pocket. I'll read it, he said. All the way through. She nodded. From the back room came the sound of Milo's pencil. That particular, quick, certain sound of a mind engaged with something it had decided to understand. Neither of them moved for a moment, just sat with that sound in the air between them. He asked me today, Elena said quietly, whether light years measure time or distance. Both, Dante said, depending on what question you're answering. That's what I told him. A pause. He said you'd probably say that. The store was very quiet around them. The evening light was the particular amber of late autumn in Chicago, coming through the front window at a low angle and laying itself across the floor and the spines of the books and the dust motes turning slowly in the air. The city was outside doing what the city did, which was everything, all at once, without stopping. In here, in this small, imperfect, necessary place, the light moved slowly across the floor and the pencil moved in the back room, and nothing needed to be other than what it was. Dante sat in the amber light and breathed carefully, and did not say anything else, and neither did Elena, and the silence between them was not empty. In the morning, he came downstairs before she was up. He made coffee. He had learned over 9 days the specific requirements of her coffee maker, which had opinions, and left a cup on the counter where she would find it. He left a second cup at the bottom of the stairs for whenever Milo came down. He had already said goodbye the night before. To Milo specifically, at bedtime, the boy matter-of-fact about it in the way he was matter-of-fact about most things. Solemn, present, not performing bravery but actually having it, in the specific way of a child who trusted that the person leaving was coming back because they had said so and he had decided to believe them. Milo had given him something at the end of it, pressed it into his hand without explanation. A torn page from the notebook, a drawing, smaller than the full-page solar system, of 2 figures standing next to each other looking up at something, the larger figure and the smaller one, both of them looking up. Dante had folded it and put it in his pocket and had not trusted himself to say much after that. Now he stood in the early morning bookstore with his coffee and looked at the shelves one more time. The science book on its low shelf in the back room, the east wall shelf fixed, the new lights in the back room on a timer already off, the front window with its display and its hand-lettered sign. He looked at the stool behind the counter where Elena stood for hours each day. He looked at the chair near the back room door where he had sat for 9 afternoons listening to a child work. He drank his coffee. Then he set the empty cup carefully in the sink the way you set things when you intend to be somewhere long enough to wash them up later, and he picked up his jacket and he walked out through the side door into the cold November morning. The street was quiet. A few early figures moving through the gray light, collars up, breath-making small clouds. Across the street, a man walking a dog. Further down, the lights of the diner on the corner beginning its morning. Dante stood on the sidewalk and looked at the front window of Whitmore's books. The science book was not visible from here, but he knew where it was. He turned up his collar and put his hands in his pockets and walked toward the car, and the morning opened around him, cold and clear and full of a city going about its business. And the letter was in his inside pocket, and the drawing was in his jacket, and the coffee was still warm in his chest. And somewhere behind him a child was waking up to fill more pages with questions about the distance between things. He did not look back. He didn't need to. He knew the way home. 12 months and 9 days later, the side door of Whitmore's books opened from the outside at 4:15 in the afternoon, just as Elena was closing the register, and Milo looked up from his desk in the back room and said, without surprise, the way people announce things they have been expecting and did not intend to act surprised by, "He's here." And Elena did not answer but set down what she was holding, and Milo got up and went to the doorway of the back room. And the man who came through the side door was thinner than he had been, and the gray at his temples had spread, and he moved with the careful economy of someone who had spent a year learning to take up less space. He stood in the bookstore and looked at the shelves and at the counter and at the boy in the doorway, and said nothing for a moment, and then said, "The east wall shelf is still holding." And Milo said, "I checked it every week." And Dante looked at him, at his son, 9 years old now, an inch taller, the notebook still under his arm, and said, "Good." And the store was quiet, and the afternoon light moved across the floor, and the science book sat on its low shelf in the back room, its margins full, waiting for more.